Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orrett Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today being Monday, the 18th day of September 2017. I trust that everyone had an enjoyable weekend. For those portions of the island that were fortunate enough to get some rain on the weekend as well, I'm sure that you have been blessed and you're extremely grateful. For some yesterday, the rain just skirted their district, central part of the Cayman Islands. The clouds and the thunder were all moving towards the northern part and then made a swing towards the west, missing a lot of us. So, like I said, some of you have lots to be thankful for when it comes to rain. Some didn't get it at all, but keep the faith. The rain will come to you soon as well and help to those trees and plants that need the watering will get it as well. Seems as if we had an incident on the weekend as well. Rumors are that it resulted in a fatality. We have not yet had that confirmed from the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service. I think they've just said a serious incident has taken place. Social media and some of the unofficial news organizations have provided additional details, and I just want to extend sympathies to all of the families involved in this unfortunate incident. As well, I want to thank you, our listening and our viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orrett Connor. My two co-hosts in the studio with me this morning, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Mcfield. You're welcome to join us in the conversation every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. During those hours, our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, it is that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flow. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, you can email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. Just a quick reminder again that we take our commercial breaks every 15 minutes. So if you're on the phone and you're talking, just keep a check on the time because you want to abbreviate your conversation at that point in time so that we don't have to interrupt you. We don't like to do that because we always want you to finish what you have to say, but we need your cooperation as well. We will have in the studio with us later on this morning, the Honorable Minister Tara Rivers will be with us, as well as her support staff, one Deputy Chief Officer, as well as one Chief Officer. We expect to be with her as well. Meanwhile, my co-hosts and I will have our usual discussions. Last Friday, we spoke about the advisory district councils, and we spoke about the call that was made by the constitutional commissioners in relation to the establishment of the advisory district councils. And this morning in one of our print newspapers, we see a huge editorial in relation to advisory district councils. I read it, and I have critiqued it to a certain point, and Dr. Steve Mcfield read it as well, and I have shared with Miss Theresa the details of that editorial also. Now, my feedback, my critique on that is, number one, there is no mention in that editorial of the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009, the highest law in the land. No mention of that. The only mention in terms of constitution was the constitutional commissioner. So this total disregard for a constitution. In addition to that, not only total disregard for a constitution, but total disregard for the will of the people. They seem to have failed to acknowledge that in the 2009 Constitution was accepted by the majority of the people of the Cayman Islands in a referendum. And it also appears as if they did not avail themselves to the available verbatim records of the constitutional negotiations that took place, because had they done that, then they would have made themselves aware of what the intentions of the lawmakers at that point in time, what the intentions were in relation to the advisory district councils. And also, again, we see a portion in there where there's an advocacy for small government, talking about, this would add to a bigger government. Well, small government, does that sound familiar? Does that sound, from the far right conservatives in terms of small government? But not only that, forget about the ideology. Small government, what does that mean? Cutting the size of government, cutting the size of the civil service. Where do the majority of Caymanians that work, that are employed in the Cayman Islands, where are they employed? In the civil service. So that advocacy for small government means that you're also, what would be affected by that would be Caymanians' employment. And do we need more of that in the Cayman Islands as well? So those are my comments in relation to it. But they seem to want to forget about advisory district councils totally, that it shouldn't come into being. It's in the Constitution. We have a law. Now, that law may be defective and may need to change as a result of subsequent changes as far as our single-member constituencies are concerned. And those who may feel that at the time that the advisory district council legislation was brought into being, that it was designed in such a way to represent the views of the government of the day. Now, if you want to change that and either represent the government now or the wider electorate's view in terms of how advisory district councils should function, then that's fine. And that could be one of the jobs of the constitutional commissioners to be able to assist us with that. So that's my 5 cents in relation to that. Dr. Steve?
Well, the ultimate paragraph alone shows the big lie or the misunderstanding or the insult that they do not, that they perpetuate. It says it is possible that Cayman can possibly have more government representatives than we have people. Well, it's not a government representative. Precisely. It's an advisory council. It's not a government representative. They're not elected. They're not paid by government. It's a group of people who advise the elected members of their districts. They seem like court judges, how clerks to advise them on the law and precedents and things like that. It has nothing to do with government representatives. But what it is, Orrett and Theresa, is it's a political and constitutional insult. It is a complete insult to us. It shows the non-Caymanian cultural and social beatdown of the Caymanian people. It's a continuous beatdown day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year to beat down the Caymanian people. If they want the country, why don't they just beat us and kill us all and take the country away from us and push us out someplace so that we can survive? It is the ugly, corrupt side of the underbelly of the Caymanian power elite who believe that they can ignore the rule of law. We have a constitution that sets out the rule of law, and they actually are advocating that we ignore the constitution and go against what it says. It is an ugly day for this country, and I fear that if we continue to do this and to allow people to do this for us, in 20 years we are all going to be on a reservation someplace other than in Cayman.
Yep. Now, those people who live in their gated communities, they may not need advisory district council because they're in their own little enclave there where everything is nice and rosy for them. But when they go outside of that enclave, then they have to deal with the realities of the Cayman Islands.
But they have their advisors.
Oh, yes.
They have their psychiatrists. And they have their psychoanalysts. And they have their bankers. And they have their accountants. And all those people to advise them about their personal and their private affairs. So what are they talking about? The small people in the country can't have a voice in the people they elect to represent them. They're not elected to represent the Compass or any other media. And to me, this is the worst insult that I have ever saw in the Cayman Islands in the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, I trust and I hope that the members of the Constitutional Commission will respond to this editorial and respond strongly, extremely strong to this editorial as well. We're going to take a commercial break now. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Mcfield. We're discussing the Caymanian Compass's editorial in relation to advisory district councils. Here we have a publication which has advocated for persons for permanent residency, has highlighted the cases before the courts in relation to judicial review, the success of those judicial reviews. So in essence, what they're doing is advocating for persons for permanent residence, but at the same time not advocating for Caymanians for their constitutional and legal rights that they have, that has been afforded to them under our Constitution. Before we go to the phone lines, very quickly, Ms. Theresa, you have a comment from one of your listeners.
I have more than one comment
okay.
from the listeners, and
Okay.
thanks very much for having us. But this is someone that is always very attuned. One of them is someone that's always attuned, at least. And I won't say some of the expletives that were sent to me, but they said, well, why don't we have any legislation that allows us to actually enforce our rights? And why is it that you have the biggest media house actively encouraging folks to breach the Constitution, which is the highest order of the law? And then the third question is, when folks, and I'm just generally saying this, when non-Caymanians want their rights enforced, they get judicial review.
Yes.
And now we are now irritants, according to what one of these writers is saying, that, should not have the right to expose and enforce our laws when it affects us personally.
Okay, Ms. Susan, we have two callers and we have about 7 minutes. So we're going to ask each caller to be as brief as possible because we have to go to the break at 8 o'clock for our news. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yes, good morning and welcome.
Morning.
Morning, Doc.
Good morning.
Yes, it says that it's the group that has the power to enforce its definition of reasons that is always in power to make what we say seem unreasonable. So there you have it all the time. It's all about power relationships. What they say through their media, through their position as cultural imperialists, has to be reasonable. And everything I say, Steve say, or they say, Theresa say, is unreasonable. So what is really bad about this is that they win simply because they are perceived by our people as having superior abilities to reason and are more reasonable people than us unreasonable people. So everything that we say is unreasonable. And we have to get out of this mindset. We have lost. Steve mentioned cultural the reservation. I said in 1979 in Time Longer and Room exactly what was going to happen to us if we did not get educated, did not get our people educated, because the discussion at that time was about whether or not we had preschool education in this country. So that was unreasonable then. What they're saying about the district council and such, that's unreasonable. You guys are talking reason. Continue to reason with us, my brothers and sisters.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you very much. Next caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. O.C.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
And good morning, Miss Theresa and Dr. Steve.
Good morning,
This is
ma'am.
Georgette Ebanks. And please, just let me say these few words. You all are babies. Babies. I will be 90 tomorrow if God lets me see the sunrise on another day. And I have watched over the years. We've sat down and we have allowed people to do whatever they wanted to do to us. A group of young women, and I was included in that in 1948, we wanted the privilege of voting. We wanted to see change. And we got up and we did something about it, even though it took 9 whole years before it came into law. You all have sat back and allowed all these things to happen. And I am not really sorry for the bunch of you, because you have no get up and go. Thank God.
Yeah.
And I am not really sorry for the bunch of
We lost her.
We lost the last part of that, Miss Georgette, but I agree with you. I agree with you that we have gotten softer and softer and softer. Everyone is so comfortable in their own little enclave, in their own little personal space. No one wants to get out there and put anything at risk. Now, this show, For the Record, is being labeled, has been, continues to be labeled as an anti-government show.
No.
And it is not. We are pro-Caymanians, and when it is necessary to take the government, to hold them to account, we will do that here on the show. And when it is time to put our hands together and clap and applaud the government, we will do that as well. But the government has to take the lead on certain things. Here, this editorial is actually encouraging the premier, not to do anything.
the
breach the Constitution.
So
How do you do that?
Let's see what happens. Somebody needs to come out and make a strong statement. We are doing it here. If necessary, I will go to the streets too, but
Me too.
I can't go there by myself.
exactly.
But I will hit the streets.
I just at the weekend, and here is what a youngster said, and I say this in the context of the tragedy that we've just had that so saddened me. This guy may not have been articulate, but he spoke to his experience. Caymanians are cowards. We are spineless. We are stupid. His 3 words. We are spineless, we are cowards, and we are stupid. Now, this is someone on the street, folks would say don't have no education, but to me, he's really educated. He can articulate his experience. And I'm not saying that I necessarily hold those views, but this is what someone is saying to me.
Yep. Dr. Steve, we have any callers? No callers? Dr. Steve, we have a few minutes left. We can get you back in.
So here it is again. Here it is again. Some people come to the country. We allow them to stay. and when we do not facilitate that fast enough, they sue us and take us to court for their rights. Sue us and take us to court for to live in our country. I have never heard that yet before. In people doing that in other countries, suing you to force the right to live in their country. And here it's as we have our law, our constitution. And I'm sure that they would not, if they were in America, they wouldn't be writing an editorial in Washington for the president of the United States to ignore the constitutional rights of people. I'm sure they wouldn't be doing that. But they think because they have power and money is power and power is money, they're synonymous with each other, that they can do what they want to do. And there are so many Caymanians people who sit around and do nothing about it because they hope to be able to get some money sometime soon, and they are not going to rock the boat for their rights.
Well, people, there is such a thing called people power as well. And again, I want to call out to every single voter, every single resident, put pressure on your members of the Legislative Assembly to move this forward. Here we are. We talk about the mother country. We talk about the mother of all parliaments. They have established committees for everything that you can think of. We are paying our legislators, and until it's time for the budget, until it's time for this strategic policy statement to be delivered, very little goes on down at that Legislative Assembly. Use committees. Engage the people in what is happening. Look at how many people are affected by the Cayman Islands Caymanian Protection Law, the amendment in 1977. How many people who reached the age of 18 and would lose their status fail to submit their application on reaching the age of 18, have lost their status, were born here in the Cayman Islands, still reside here. Those are the people that we need to start to take care of. We need committees to investigate these things, for people to be able to go in front of their legislators and present their issues to them. Folks, we have to take a break. When we return, we will have the Honorable Tara Rivers on with us, as well as her support staff. So please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I am your host, Orrett Connor. My two co-hosts, Dr. Steve Mcfield, Miss Theresa Pitcairn, and it is my pleasure to have in the studio with me the Honorable Tara Rivers, who has constitutional responsibility for financial services and home affairs. We also have in the studio with us Chief Officer in the Ministry, Dr. Dax Basdeo, and the Deputy Chief Officer in the Ministry, Miss Kathryn Dinspel-Powell. Good morning. Welcome back to For the Record, Minister. I'm not sure that I've seen you since the elections.
No.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
It is always good to have you here.
It's always a pleasure, OC, to interact with you and your listening audience. I want to say a very special good morning to everyone in Radio Cayman Land. Certainly want to say good morning to your co-host, which is a new addition since I think the last time we have graced these particular show. And of course, I'm happy to have my support team in the ministry to be able to answer whatever technical questions may come up about the operations. But certainly, it is a pleasure for me to be here in the new capacity of Minister for Financial Services and Home Affairs. And so look forward to having a lively discussion in that regard.
Yeah, and the focus this morning, Minister, we're going to basically focus on prisons and rehabilitation as well. And we can start off the conversation by letting the public know about your particular ministry, because it's sort of an unusual mixture. I don't think that we've seen or had this combination before.
Well, thank you. See, and certainly I think as far as ministries and combinations, it's probably as interesting as one can get Certainly, just briefly, as you said, we do want to focus on, because it is so broad and vast and it covers a number of very critical services to the country. But I wanted to give a bit of an overview, just to take a step back so people understand. So with respect to financial services, we are certainly responsible for the overall for the industry, for the financial services industry. And as you know, what I think is really interesting and unique about the Ministry of Financial Services is that we know that we've had a financial services industry from the 60s, 70s there on. But in terms of having a dedicated ministry with a focus that has been placed on financial services from the kind of ministry policy and legislative perspective, that really has only come about in the last few years. So from the 2013 administration is when we really put a great emphasis on having a minister for financial services. And so it is a relatively new ministry in the scheme of government ministries, but of course it is one of our key, if not the key industry for the country as it relates to providing a source of government revenue. So with that, we as minister have got constitutional responsibility for providing the policy direction and legislative strategic kind of outlook for where we want the industry to go and to continue to flourish and be prosperous. But at the same time, we realize that in any democracy, because we have a well-established industry and because we have also a well-established regulatory framework through the work of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, I really see my role as kind of acting as a quarterback in many respects, bringing together the views, the input, the working relationship and collaboration with the industry, financial services industry, as well as working very closely with the regulator and regulators to ensure that we do have a robust regulatory framework. So that's kind of a really high-level overview of kind of how the ministry and the interplay of the ministry in the local economy. Of course, as you know, by the nature of the industry, we do have it's very international in its scope and focus, and so therefore there is also a need to continue to work very closely, to respond to engage with international stakeholders, and of course the UK being one of the primary stakeholders in that regard. But of course there is also the EU, the US, the OECD, and some of these other, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, and some of the other kind of international regulatory and interested organizations as it relates to our financial services industry. So it's a very small, but very efficient, very busy, and very vibrant ministry in that regard. Switching to Home Affairs now, as you said, this is the first time that we've had this particular combination, but it also does, in the Home Affairs, we've had some movement or some changes in some of those responsibilities. We've tried to find greater synergies with some of the subject matter. So you'll know that immigration now, which used to sit under Home Affairs previously, actually sits with Labor. Mm-hmm. And you and I, we've had many conversations in my previous capacity about how that synergy definitely needed to become greater. And so one of the ways that we as a government felt we could do that is actually to house it in the same ministry to kind of move forward some of those initiatives that we just weren't able to get past the hump in the last administration. So immigration is no longer part of the Home Affairs umbrella, nor is the responsibility for the police budget. Mm-hmm. But other than that, everything else that would be under Home Affairs is considered a part of Home Affairs. So that includes the prisons, that includes fire, that includes hazard management, the 911, so the communications, emergency management system, and the Department of Community Rehabilitation. And I think that covers it all. And I'll ask my technical people if there's anything that I had forgotten in that regard. But certainly, as I said today, we wanted to really look at the work of the prisons and the Department of Community Rehabilitation together, because there's good synergies there. Mm-hmm. And there's a good focus. And it's one of the kind of policy perspectives that I've been able to deliver very early in the tenure, is to say how we look at, helping to create a safer environment, to address the issue of crime, but also through focusing on offender rehabilitation efforts before they even get into the prison service, while they're in the prison service, and then, of course, when they are released on conditional release or otherwise. And so the relationship between the Department of Community Rehabilitations and the prisons has already been one that's quite strong in that regard. And in terms of preparing even for the budget this year, I wanted them to kind of look around the themes that we're trying to address and the outcomes as opposed to the individual departments. So there was lots of collaboration between the two entities in terms of coming up with what some of the initiatives that they have going on now and what they hope to achieve in the coming years. And so just even the way we've approached the budget is, in my mind, a little bit more logical to get the kind of outcomes that we want to get, which is, as I said, ultimately creating that kind of safer environment, addressing the issue of concerns about, crime, and specifically as it relates to the work of those two agencies.
Are we likely to see a distinct departure from the direction that various departments have taken in the past? Are we likely to see a distinct departure from that?
No, I don't think so. I think what we're doing is just basically strengthening and enhancing what has already kind of been the foundation. So, we'll hopefully be able to get into some of the details about some of the actual programs that are already in place to address the needs of the clientele, as I'd refer to the group of individuals that these two departments in particular service. So it's about trying to create this kind of continuum of care, as I said, from the time they get into the criminal justice system. They are then on the radar, I think, of the Department of Community Rehabilitation. They do start to have some initial interaction. And then, of course, then if they are then ultimately sentenced to Her Majesty's prison, either Northwood or Fairbanks, then, of course, then that relationship continues while they're incarcerated. And of course, we know we do have a regime now that we've introduced, the kind of conditional release regime that allows people to get back into the community, but it does really have a focus on rehabilitation. And so the idea of working with our incarcerated population to ensure that we try to address the issue of recidivism is now certainly it's there. I think there's more of a legal obligation now too to try to make sure we put those things in place in a real way that tries to create that sense of, once they're released with some prospect of employment. So there's a working relationship with the NWDA from that regard, and that started in the last administration as well. So to answer your question, no, I don't see that there's a significant departure, and it's certainly not about coming in and creating a whole different regime. It's about making sure we're finding even greater synergies and becoming even more effective with the resources. Because as you would recall very much in our conversations, it's not just about throwing more resources at an issue. It's making sure you're getting the greatest results of the resources that you do have. And that's really the focus that we're trying to do. Okay,
Minister, we're going to take a commercial break. Now, when we return, I want you to, would ask you if you could explain further this whole issue of continuum of care, take that a little further for us. And then we would be also curious to know some of the types of services that are available to offenders in the community, as well as those services that are available in the prison also. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to hold off on the phone calls until about 8:45. After the 8:45 break, then we will take any callers who wish to call into the minister or to her support staff as well. And of course, the minister who is with us is the Honorable Tara Rivers, who now has responsibility for financial services and home affairs. We also have with us Chief Officer Dr. Dax Basdeo and Deputy Chief Officer Ms. Kathryn Dinspel-Powell. And before we took the break, we wanted to continue with the discussion and a further explanation of the continuum of care provided to offenders. And I think, Minister, you wanted to hand over to Mr.
Thank you, mostly for that question again. And I know I kind of introduced the concept in the earlier response to your question, but I certainly would like to ask now the Deputy Chief Officer, Ms. Dinspel, to give us more details about what this real continuum of care involves.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, OC, and Ms. Theresa and Mr. Steve. Good morning, Cayman. The continuum of care is really a best practice model that can be applied across various disciplines. For us in our efforts to rehabilitate offenders, it really means a joined up, seamless approach to providing services to persons, whether or not they're in the community or in the prison, and ensuring that if their journey somehow takes them throughout those two places, community, prison, and back to community, that the services that they get help them to progress, and hopefully at the end the goal obviously is to reduce their chances of recidivating and committing another crime, and more so the focus on becoming a well-rounded and contributing member of society. Those two departments, community rehabilitation and the prison service, have always had a very close working relationship. But in 2015, the directors of those two departments came together and developed a continuum of care plan, which really helped to solidify the working relationship that they had had prior to that. And again, the effort was to ensure that there was a holistic approach to the delivery of services. And the focus in the community and in the prison is on education, prevention, and rehabilitative services and interventions to address the individual specific needs of offenders. And the focus is to also address the underlying causes of their criminal behavior. We focus on giving them new coping skills, whether that be practical skills like work skills, interpersonal skills that will help them in their relationships, problem-solving skills, really trying to look at all of the different facets of their life where maybe there have been certain deficiencies that somehow have contributed to them being engaged with the criminal justice system. Once a referral is received from the courts, the magistrate or the judge may often require what is referred to as a pre-sentencing or social inquiry report to sort of help them determine whether or not an individual is well suited to go on a community-based license, or whether indeed a custodial sentence is required. And the Department of Community Rehabilitation uses a number of standardized assessment tools, does an extensive evaluation of the individual in various contexts, their home, their employment, the society, looks obviously at their previous and current offending history, because the evaluation of the level of risk to society is very important, and then provides the court with their sort of summary findings and some recommendations around whether or not a custodial versus a community-based sentence may be appropriate. If the judge then determines that it would be best for the individual to remain in the community, which would enable them to continue, if they are employed, to contribute to the financial well-being of their families, etc., there are a number of different licenses that they can be placed on. And they will obviously pick the one that they think is the most suitable. But whatever type of a community-based order they end up being on, they will be assigned to a probation officer. And for the duration of that license, the individual will be supervised by the probation officer, who will also determine whether or not there's a need for other services to be delivered during that time of the order. If the individual has a history of drug or alcohol issues, there is some mental illness, perhaps, that's contributed to their difficulties in the past, those referrals will be made, and the probation officer will liaise with the professionals in those departments to ensure that the offender has access and continues to keep those necessary appointments. So there's synergy in that side of the working relationship as well with other agencies in the community, the mental health department, the Department of Counselling Services, the Family Resource Centre. And really, again, the approach is to try to address all of the needs of the offender in a holistic way. Now, if the judge determines that because of the nature of the offence and perhaps some of the risk factors, that it would be more suitable for the individual to be referred to the prison for a period of incarceration, there's really a plan that kicks into play from the time the offender comes through the gate. So all of the previous work that's been done to assess the offender up until that point is shared with the prison, so they're not receiving someone blind. Mm-hmm. And then the probation officer will continue to work together with that offender and with the prison's rehabilitation team to, again, address the necessary factors that they really looks like have contributed to their offending behaviour in the past. And again, the goal is certainly to hopefully prevent them from coming back through the gates again, and to ensure that when they get into the community, they have some tools and are better equipped to engage in a crime-free lifestyle and contribute to society in a positive way. Right now, I think all of the women in Fairbanks are actively working with a probation officer. So are the majority of the men. Case plans are in place for these individuals, and these plans really capture the active work that's being done by the DCR and the prison staff and other agencies. And there's an effort to review those plans on an ongoing basis because we recognize that the needs of people change. And sometimes as different services are offered, it becomes apparent that there's something else that they require that maybe wasn't identified at the outset. So they are also very live, vibrant case plans. They're not static. Re-entry planning, reintroducing the offender into the society at the end of their sentence, is also something that starts from the time they come into the gate, because it's recognized that there are, in addition to some of those other needs that I talked about for coping skills, relationship skills, maybe some drug addiction and or mental health issues, there are practical challenges that people face, particularly with regard to employment and housing. And we know that if people come out of prison and have stable housing and stable employment, that really goes a long way to helping prevent them from getting back into the criminal justice system again. We do have a very vibrant relationship with the Needs Assessment Unit to assist those persons who may not be financially in a position to afford their own housing at the outset when they're released out of prison, and work with other agencies like the NWDA. Ms. Jean Solomon and her team, we're very grateful for the employability and work skills programs that she and her team provide. And they help inmates with practical things like interviewing skills, even letting people know how to dress for an interview, how to maintain eye contact, some of the practical things that perhaps they just haven't had an opportunity by virtue of their life circumstances to be exposed to before. And I think, again, as Minister mentioned, I mean, obviously one of the key priorities for this administration is to reduce the crime in the community and also the fear of crime. And rehabilitating offenders fits perfectly into that. It is one of the key things that has to happen if we are going to be successful in maintaining and achieving that goal.
Okay. Quick question. Do you feel a few questions if you could cover in that actually, the sufficiency of staffing and resources, whether or not you have enough to cover. Is the focus more on repeat offenders than, say, someone who has been incarcerated for one single event as opposed to being a career offender? And any work with non-governmental organizations?
Well, see, I'll start briefly with the first question and turn it over, I guess, to the DCO to speak more specific about the other questions about the nature of the offender in terms of repeat versus individual and the relationships that they have with the community. But certainly, one of the, as was indicated previously, one of the key focus areas for the government, as reflected in the SPS and reflected in the budget, is to look at this need to address crime, fear of crime, and in particular the services to our ex-offender and even, incarcerated population. So we have in the budget, and again, not here to go through the specifics of what that is at this time, but certainly we'll do so when we actually go to table the budget in October. We have certainly put an increase in for the resources to both the prison as well as the Department of Community Rehabilitation in order to continue to address some of the needs which they have been doing to this point. But of course, there are, with the additional laws that have come into play in the last administration and later in the last administration, it does actually put additional work and additional responsibility on the Department of Community Rehabilitation in particular, because as Kathryn indicated, the relationship between DCR and the courts is very integral. The courts and the judicial system as a whole relies on various reports that they produce. The Conditional Release Board also relies on these types of assessments. And so we realize that we need to do more of an investment to be able to deliver on the requirements of that department, and again, as well as the prisons, to be able to actually deliver on these rehabilitative programs. I also want to mention, though, and I think I will leave Kathryn to go into some of the details, but the kind of, again, policy steer has been to continue to develop the public-private partnerships with the community as best as possible to not just design and create, but also deliver on some of these program. So, for example, in looking at the technical and vocational aspect, the prisons have recently introduced a construction program, which was facilitated, I think, there's 3 construction companies. And again, I'll ask Kathryn to make sure that we give each of those the recognition, because they really stepped up to the plate to provide the opportunity for the prisoners to get real hands-on practical experience, learning the skills and the trade in the construction industry. And so we're looking to roll out a similar type of model with other industries, hair and beauty, barbering. There's a number of proposals on the table that I think it's critical, not just because it saves the need to actually hire somebody in the prisons, but I think really we want the prisoners to get skills to be able to deliver what is needed in the industry, and we need to have the input of those various industries to say exactly what those skills should be. So I think it's creating that synergy, and it also creates an opportunity for them to build the relationships as well, because we all know employment very much is about the kind of relationships that you can build as well. So if the prisoners can get those relationships while they're still in prison to develop relationships with employers or prospective employers, then their chances of actually getting employment post-incarceration is that much higher. So that's the benefit also of trying to encourage and develop those type of synergies in the community. So I'll just ask Kathryn maybe to fill in any other blanks that you would need from the questions you asked earlier.
Okay, we're going to go to a commercial break now. When we come back, we'll ask Ms. Dinspel-Powell to elaborate even further on that. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. On the panel with us this morning, the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister who has responsibility for financial services and home affairs, Chief Officer Dr. Dax Basdeo, and Deputy Chief Officer Ms. Kathryn Dinspel-Powell with us as well. And we're going to hand the mic back over to Ms. Dinspel-Powell.
Thanks, O.C. I'm going to pick up on the question that you asked about whether we focus our interventions on first-time offenders or repeat or more prolific offenders, and try to give the listening public some detail around what our focus is in both areas. With the first-time offender, those are actually people that we really want to focus on. Our hope is that if someone who, for whatever reason, has come to the courts for a first-time offense, possession of ganja, consumption of ganja tend to be some of those. So the more minor offenses, it doesn't mean that they get less supervision, less treatment, less intervention, because what we're hoping is that the level of intervention they do get will prevent them from coming back to the system again. So typically they would end up being placed on something like a community service order, maybe an attendance order. And with the community service orders in particular, they're very powerful because they also give the probation officers an opportunity to impress upon people what the impact of their crime is on the community. Help them to look at taking some more individual and as well as social responsibility. And in the work that they have to do in the community, which they have to do free of charge on their own time, there is also then that opportunity to give back and to try to begin making amends for how the community may have been damaged by the crime that they committed. And really, again, the focus there is what is it that's caused this person to come to the system in the first place, and then how do we prevent them, hopefully, from engaging in what may become a life of crime. So it's also an opportunity to do, through that assessment, identifying where they may have other needs, if it is that they need drug and alcohol counseling, if it is that they do have some underlying mental health issues, getting those resources into place. Maybe there's some relationship issues going on with them and their spouse or them and their kids, so plugging some of those pieces in. And really, again, the hope is that this will be the first and last time that they come to the system's attention. And that would be considered a success.
Okay. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. I just want to remind the caller that the Honorable Minister, the police department does not fall under her portfolio at all. Caller, good morning.
Yes, sir. Good morning. I just want to say something real quick.
Sure.
It's a good thing you're doing with the prison and everything, but I'm wondering, I haven't heard from any politician about programs enabling Cayman to get into the police force, or improving the police force. We got to keep in mind that it's a very important thing. And we have school leavers coming out at the age of 16, 17. Some of these kids, we have to keep in mind that some of these kids are still lacking in communication skills, maybe in mathematics, maybe in English. And we have to implement this thing. It's really important. I haven't only one politician I've heard so far, God bless the man, and that's John. That's the only man that I hear that's, talking about academy or whatever. But we have to start a program for our people.
Okay. Thank you very much, caller, for that.
Yes, thank you, caller. And I mean, I really, I think to your point about starting a program, I think there's actually an opportunity that seems to be a fantastic one to help people get a taste of what it is to be a police constable by participating in the special constable program. And I know, because I heard it on various programs, they
were on.
There's an actual plea for additional special constables going on right now, and I know I guess the commandant Chris Duggan was very active on the various radio waves, trying to encourage people to come forward. And as far as I understand, the training that is the system is very structured. It provides an excellent basis for the kind of training, the kind of skills that you'd need to demonstrate. It actually looks at people's the skill sets that they have coming in. So if they have a particular interest and they have a particular focus, or they have because this is a volunteer position, of course. But I think, especially to your point about young people, we know in any society, the youth unemployment is probably the greatest as a percentage of any of the unemployment statistics. But that said, I think it's a great way for young people to really try before you buy, so to speak. And it also gives the service an opportunity to help develop and groom those individuals. So even before we go to the point of having a full-fledged police academy, I believe that people should really take advantage of the opportunities that exist and take the training. It is, as I understand, to be a very structured program. I think, they've introduced a 2-year period of probation, which is similar to, I think, what the police does as well. So they're trying to mirror the experience very much to what it would be to be a police officer. And of course, so that I think is something that I would certainly encourage and support anybody that's considering doing police work to, especially, if you're, and again, it is the time commitment is minimal because they do recognize many people have full-time jobs, but it would be a great way, especially for young people who may not necessarily have employment at this point, to develop some skills that will help them to become employable, even if they decide that they don't want to stay with the police service. So that's my recommendation in that regard, and want to thank the caller for that particular perspective.
I think just to add to that also, Minister, I believe it's 15 hours per month. But there may be a limit in terms of the number of special constables, because I think in this recruitment drive, there was a certain number that they may have been looking for. We have one more caller. Let's go to the phone lines before we go to our headline news. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning again, Doc.
Yeah, I was listening actually to the thought of description of the total or the integrative type of rehabilitative program that the government is using. And what I always find is that most of these methodologies are more ideals rather than practical solutions. They're ideals rather than practical solutions because none of them actually takes into account the tension between the offender and the society as a whole. The society is the one who's giving the prescription for cure, but the prisoner is not involved in that because we have a very authoritarian system of finding solutions to social and psychological problems. A more egalitarian way is actually necessary. And although people might be interfacing with prisoners, we never see this in the solutions. When we look at the solutions, we see that the solutions are totally dictatorial, although on a banner of liberalism, because we're saying we're being humane by making these considerations for these people without even asking them whether or not these considerations are relevant at that particular time. So what I would suggest to the minister to do is to try to see if we can get a better understanding. And I remember there was a Mr. Adam McIntyre who wrote a very, very important book in our prison system. He worked in it. He was incarcerated, and he went and he studied, and he gave us and he revealed to us a methodology of understanding criminal behavior and what it will take to reform the prisoner, to reform the prison system. We need to have that, or we are a small island, and as a result of that, we have disadvantages. But one of the advantages we have is that we can see each other on a day-to-day basis, and we can observe each other's behavior. And perhaps if we act as the sociologists or the criminologists, we will find solutions that are not just part of the wider world. And, you know, the problem with America and the solutions in America with regards to incarceration is America is a country in which the most incarcerated people, they have more incarcerated people than any place in the world. So they come up with these garbage solutions that don't really sort of impact the core of the problem that we could have in a little small, tiny, more democratic society like ours, where we can see one-to-one that what is at the problem here is the tension between the incarcerated and the bureaucracy, which wants to be good towards them and help them, but don't really understand what the whole dynamics is all about.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you very much for that. We still have about 3 minutes for an opportunity. Anyone who wants to respond to Dr. Frank?
I had the same questions as well. I had, how do prisoners feel? How do you know what kind of relationship you have with them? Whether or not what is being offered is actually what the prisoners are going to embrace, because whether or not they're going to consider it useful, and how successful are these programs? And then I had a side question about unemployment, because if Caymanians who are outside the prison are complaining about unemployment, what are you going to use to legitimize and motivate prisoners about and incentivize prisoners about employment prospects?
Okay, that's a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the issue of employment prospects, and again, I'll speak very briefly about it because it is an area that I'm sure the Deputy Governor or the Chief of the Portfolio of Civil Service will probably give the more specifics, but it's certainly one of the things that the government has recognized is a bit of an obstacle for the unemployed population, or sorry, the incarcerated population. They already have a hurdle to overcome. We started to address that from a legislative perspective when we've introduced the new legislation that allows the expungement of records after a certain period of time and after a certain period of years that you've proven yourself to be crime-free. Again, that there is a process for that, but that is, I think, a piece of really fundamental legislation that needed to have been introduced for a while now, but we were successful in getting that done in the last administration. It's about now making sure we operationalize that, so people who may have had, and because we're not talking just about recent, persons who have been released from the prison. I mean, these issues have affected people who have been incarcerated for many, many, many years and decades. So this legislation will really help to remove some of those obstacles for some of those persons who may have been chronically unemployed because of the police record that they have carried as their legacy, even though they may have been crime-free for many years afterwards. So I think that, from a policy perspective and from a legislative perspective, the government has recognized that this is a major stumbling block, and we've addressed it. The program that I alluded to initially when I started to speak about it's actually looking at introducing a way for ex-offenders to find employment in a meaningful way within the public service. Because I think one of the things that, we are, and quite frankly, I mean, anybody knows me, I call a spade, we're asking the private sector to hire ex-offenders, but there seem to have been so many obstacles for ex-offenders to get hired within the public service. And so it's about creating a system that is reasonable, that is practical, and that will, be able to address those needs in a way that what is good for the goose is good for the gander. And that will open up employment opportunities too. Again, I don't have the specifics of the program, but from a policy perspective, that was pretty much the kind of view that the government had, put forward. And we're very happy to see that is something that the administration is going to take forward in this next coming term.
Okay.
So
we have to go to headline news.
Okay.
We have one caller from Little Cayman. So we're going to ask that caller to please hang in there. Quick for headline news. When we return, we will take that caller. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. As promised, we're going straight to the phone lines to Little Cayman. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Connor from Little Cayman.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to Director Ms. Rivers. I got a big issue with the food allowance. What happened is they got me down here for 3 weeks, and I only getting $283.80. And every other person that comes here from another department is supposed to get like $75 per diem. So I want to find out what it is that we only getting $13 and something cents a day.
Okay. And you're serving in what capacity over there, our caller?
I'm an acting station officer
Okay.
in Little Cayman. I'm in charge.
Okay, thank you very much. Please listen to the response.
And actually, thank you, caller. I'm going to ask either the chief officer or deputy chief to take this particular question, because obviously this is a bit of more of an administration specific type of issue. So I don't necessarily have the details to hand myself on this, but I'm sure somebody will be able to provide some clarity to the situation.
Sure.
Curtis, morning. This is Kathryn. How are you?
How you doing?
Good. Thanks for the opportunity to address this. I'll be the first to acknowledge that prior to April of this year, we were actually using the per diem that is available in the government's official travel policy. And we didn't take the decision to move away from that system lately. Unfortunately, you'll be aware that we did have an audit, external audit that required us to increase the manning levels in Little Cayman. And as a result of that, the costs also doubled because the requirement was that we increase it, that we double the staffing complement. And given that decision or that directive was received by us after the budget was finalized, we hadn't made budgetary provisions for that and had to figure out how to absorb the necessary increase for the staffing and still be within the parameters of our budget. And when we looked at some of the policy guidelines and other things that were in place, really what was guiding us was the provision in the Public Service Management Law and the regulations for a $400 per month hardship allowance that is available to officers who work in Little Cayman. We've had some discussion at the senior level and obviously understand that really the purpose and intent of a hardship allowance is in recognition of the fact that you're separated from your family, you're away from your home, you're working outside of and living outside of your normal environment, and that it doesn't necessarily take into consideration the things like how expensive food items are in Little Cayman. Yeah. So it is something that we're taking under advisement, and we appreciate the concern that's been raised by yourself and some of the other staff, and just wanted to assure you that we are actively looking at how we can address this in the very near future and beg you to sort of bear with us while we come to a workable solution that I think compensates officers like yourself who make that sacrifice and go to Little Cayman for us to ensure that we deliver these critical services. And also helps us to work with the chief and the rest of the senior team from a budgetary standpoint.
Yeah, I just want to let you know, too, that I went through every channel that I had to get to this point, you know.
I appreciate that.
I went to the DO. I went to the senior DO. I called the secretary. I called the deputy. I called the chief. Chief called the secretary. The secretary called me back. I went to Mr. Moores. I went to my sister, Julie. And I even called Ms. Rivers, and I didn't get no answer back, so I never had no choice but to call back.
Well, no. Thank you for your perseverance and appreciate you for calling in this morning.
And you have the commitment now that they're looking into it, caller. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Mcfield, we haven't heard from you yet, haven't given you the chance to ask a question or an observation.
Well, I would just like to commend the minister for the work she's doing in the prison. It seems to me that she's grasped the responsibilities of the portfolio that she's been assigned to, and I really, really would like to congratulate her for the consideration of taking some of these unemployed people, because they have convictions, into the public service and giving them a chance. I think we ought to lead by example, and I think the minister's leading by example, and I think that will go a long way to help some of our people to get back on their feet again and to start a new life in the community after they have been released.
Thank you very much.
If I may just add to that, we always use Mr. Walling Whitaker as a shining example of that in the Department of Environmental Health, where
when he was in charge,
ex-convicts were employed there. They enjoyed the job that they were doing, and they worked diligently, at it as well. So we have examples that have taken place in government.
Absolutely, and one of the ways, just kind of picking up on the point about the Department of Environmental Health, and we didn't get a chance to speak a bit earlier, so I'm glad you raised it because you triggered my memory. There's a recent program that you might have seen. I think we put out a press release on. It has a very interesting name. I think it's Inmates Road Parties. I think it's kind of what it's dubbed internally. And what it is basically it is a partnership with the DEH while inmates are still incarcerated to go out and assist with some of the cleanup work. Yes. On the roads, and I think they've started kind of in the Bodden Town area, because obviously the location of Northwood. But that, I'm really hoping will take root, and we can actually have those inmate road parties across the island. Certainly, I already have a request from West Bay, in terms of an area that we know, no fault of. I think, I would say no fault of, but it's in, in the Barkas area, there's constant washing up of garbage. So no matter how much you clean, no matter how much you hire to clean, inevitably the next week it's going to be full of garbage again. So this creates obviously a steady flow of work for people, and so hopefully I'm actually going to be reaching out to the director to see how we can facilitate that type of expansion of that program, working with under the auspices of DEH, and of course when just to give the community understanding that when the inmates are out in these environments, they are supervised. They're suitably supervised, and transportation provision and everything is in place. So it's not like we just let them out and let them roam free in case people are concerned in that regard. But it's about building those relationships, as I said, from early, so they can determine who are really committed, and then hopefully once they're released, if there are employment opportunities available with those agencies, they can just be easily subsumed that way.
Okay. Now, Minister, we don't want to leave Dr. Dax Bastille out of the conversation at all. And if we could touch on financial services for a minute. We know that all government departments are facing challenges. One that the financial services industry will be facing is the whole issue of Brexit and what happens after Brexit. In looking at some of the parliamentary committees, we see where the premiers and chief ministers of some of the overseas territories in July, I believe it was, had an opportunity to meet with some of the the particular department that is dealing with Brexit and the overseas territories. And the overseas territories have asked to have more of a say and to be more involved when it comes to issues that are going to affect them. Can you elaborate on what the Cayman Islands, as far as the financial services, what we're doing in that regard, and possibly some of the challenges that we may face?
Well, I think, OC, certainly the trip in July that you're referring to, I also was on that trip with the Premier, and it was the pre-GMC meeting that they had in London, where the kind of chief ministers and premiers of the various overseas territories had an opportunity to caucus amongst themselves, but also to meet with relevant departments in the UK. And we had an actual face-to-face with the minister in the Foreign and Commonwealth office, and so we had an opportunity to have a direct dialogue about issues of concern for us, and as you highlighted, quite frankly, Brexit and the impact that it may have on the financial services industry, and some of the other challenges that is facing the financial services industry from an international perspective. So that dialogue has started, and we were given a commitment at the pre-GMC by the by the UK delegation that attended that, and there were a number of ministers actually who were there and spoke, that there would be, continuing dialogue with the overseas territories, and I think they did say on a quarterly basis. So I know we are scheduled to return for the actual JMC meeting in November. So I suspect that there will certainly be an opportunity to continue that dialogue to see, because of course, as you know, and as you can see, it's still a work in progress. I think even from over in the UK's side and Europe's side, the actual how and if it's going to be, to use the terms that are bandied about, hard Brexit, soft Brexit, what the actual specifics will be. So it is still, I think, to some degree a work in progress, but we have been very active in making sure that we made the request to say we need to be considered, and here are some of the concerns that we have specifically that we would like to ensure that you consider when you get to the negotiating table. So it's something that we are very aware of and will continue to support by actually having active engagement. I will ask the chief officer to kind of fill in some of the details as to some of the, as you said, some of the approaches that we've been taking and maybe some of the challenges that we are rising to in order to achieve a robust.
Okay, we're due to take a commercial break in about 2 minutes, and I know Dr. Dax is going to need more time in that. We do have one caller, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the caller, and then we can respond to the caller as well as Dr. Dax can expand on what you've said as well. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Morning, O.C.
Good morning, sir.
The pan of the eldest McKeever from the Brock.
Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Rivers. Congratulations on your victory again. Anyhow, you're in charge of the prison now. Let me tell you something, you got a big job, because I don't know if honor know, but I've been in prison 3 times, for gun and jam. So I know the in and the out of the prison. And what we have done, listen, we have taken our young, innocent little fools smoking weed and put them in prison with smugglers, with fraud. I learned more in prison than I learned going to school, and including mathematics. I paid a Jamaican math teacher. He was smuggling then I paid him with cigarettes and food to teach me mathematics. But from then, our focus was not on trying to teach the Caymanians better. Our focus was get them out the way. We don't need them. We can hire this one. We can do this. Now listen to me. And on the listen to me good. On the invest some money in gun rest. Thing, because the young one is coming out. And they up in there, they got children and they do know nothing better, because we never taught them no better. And I live on the street, I got friends in high and low places. And most of my friends are in low places. Let me tell you something, you see, on the laughing, also you remember when you were immigration, Honor used to go around and checking the things who was illegal and all that. They're not doing that no more. That's why the young Caymanian, he can't get no job, because corruption in high places. The little nigga here on the street just trying to survive, keeping head above the water. He's competing against ruthless outsiders and college graduates. You know the next war gonna be in Cayman. It gonna be against the Jamaican, the Filipino, the Spaniard. Because the Filipino, they got the education. The Jamaican got the hard work, and the Spaniard got the language, the looks. And the Caymanian, we somewhere down below. The rich, and I got how to fence off on the place, and I got how to fence it off. You see the businesses, all the business in Cayman, they broke them like it's going to start. Look here, they importing Dracula, to suck the blood. Look here, up in Windsor Park, they find killer up there. They arrest him. Who else had him there? They shoot man up there. Who had him there? And I'm not starting to think about this thing.
Okay.
You know something? And I have a nice day and enjoy Cayman.
Thank you.
I enjoying it.
Thank you very much, caller. Thank you very much for that. We're going to take a commercial break. We just trust Dr. Mcfield and Miss Theresa that the statute of and Miss Honorable Rivers as well, the statute of limitations have expired in terms of what he's saying that he's done in the prison, as well. Just a joke. Please stay tuned. For the Record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're going to close off the phone lines now because the minister has to, we had one person waiting. Okay, we're going to accommodate that person who's been waiting because the minister has to leave for another appointment. Actually, she was supposed to leave at 9, but we stretched it until 9:30. So we're going to ask this caller to please be concise and brief. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Morning, Mr. Osei. Morning to your guests.
Morning, sir.
I'm always concise. It's Johan.
yes. I must say that, yes.
Three questions. Good morning to Minister Rivers. I just want to say that you're very fortunate to have two top quality chief officers or in the studio with you and in your ministry. So congratulations. I think you got the pick of the litter there.
Good morning.
Morning. Two questions. First question, are there any immediate plans from a policy perspective, from a medium to long-term perspective to privatize Her Majesty's Northwood Prison? One. Okay. Two, is there some sort of government policy or directive that we should try and grow the population as swiftly as possible? Because it would appear that there was a delay in granting PR, and now everybody seems to be getting PR after the threat of lawsuits. So is there an active policy and directive that you guys have discussed that says we need to get the population to about, 75, 100,000, because we've done a 180 on how these things seem to work. And the last question is, as Minister of Financial Services, what will be done to fight the fight for the Cayman Islands when you consider the fact that the financial services industry represents 60% of our GDP, but we seem to have to jump through many more hoops than everybody else that is a British dependent territory. Do you think, in your opinion, and in your dealings with them as a cabinet minister over the last term and a couple of months, that Mother actually understands the success of the Cayman Islands is built on the financial services industry, which employs many Caymanians, and we have one of the most robust regulatory regimes in the world? Our major competitors, we're held to a completely different standard than our competitors. So what are we going to do to impress upon them you can't continue to hack away at the thing that makes Cayman not dependent on the UK, much like the other dependent territories who are heavily reliant on tourism?
Got you.
Yeah.
Got you on that. Thank you very much. Minister, in your wrap-up, you can deal with all of those.
Sure.
Let's hear from Dr. Dax
Okay.
first.
Thank you. I'll try and expand on the earlier statement that the minister made and also answer the third question.
Sure.
So in relation to Brexit in particular, I think the team for financial services has spent a good while building some very strong relationships, not just in the UK, but also across the various agencies and organizations that deal with financial services. And that is helping us to make sure that we are very well understood, that the level of quality in terms of our standards for our industry are there, understood. They're evolving and growing as the global industry changes. I think that's going to make sure that we have a much more long-term success in the financial services industry. Not just from Brexit, making sure that the UK is aware of what we're doing and how we are contributing to the global economy, but also working with the EU member states themselves to show how we benefit them and therefore how we can increase the business in those areas. So I think from the standpoint of engagement, making sure that our position is very well understood. That's something that we are doing quite well. I think we've built a very strong reputation in many quarters, OECD and other international institutions, that they can look at us, see what we're doing, understand what we're doing to help the world economy through financial services, and therefore believe that we're in the right path. And I think that's going to lead us to have long-term success.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doc.
Yes, thank you. And I'll start with the previous caller from the BRAC, Mr. Elvis McKeever, and to just say that, thank him for his call. Thank him for keeping it real, as we say. Thank you for being direct about airing the concerns that I know many people might share. Just also want to share some additional information, which it does tie in very much to what his concern was, basically, the kind of lack of focus on education of the, young people, are in particular making sure that they they get the skills that they need to get. And he highlighted the fact that he learned math in prison. Well, we want to be able to get him where we can. And certainly there has been established, during the last administration, and it will certainly be a focus in this administration, given my current role, moving from that of education but to prisoner rehabilitation. There was a relationship with the Department of Education that was put in place to ensure that the students that, they are still students in the sense that they may be, either the youth offenders who are incarcerated, that they will continue to get the training and the skills if they were doing either the BTEC course or any of the actual to facilitate that continuation of their formal education while they are incarcerated. So there is that relationship with the Department of Education, and it's something that we will certainly look to support. So our young people can get the right skills, even though they may not be in necessarily the institution at the time that you would think that would provide those skills. So it's kind of bringing the mountain to Muhammad, so to speak. Also, there is a thrust to kind of introduce just in the general population, more of literacy training and even, numeracy, IT training. So again, trying to help to equip our, prisoners to get those basic skills and tools that they may not have gotten. And we know, and we've seen various reports, many reasons that people, many times people end up in the prison system is because, or at least let's put it, there's a correlation between the lack of formal education and those who end up in prison. So we're trying to fill some of those gaps while they're there. To turn to the last caller, I wanted to also thank him for the call and to actually reiterate what he said about the definitely the competence of both the chief officer and the deputy chief officer. I mean, for my very short period of time that I've been in the ministry, and I've always liked to give credit where credit's due, and I'll give it publicly here now. I've told them privately already. I think that we have a very small but very efficient, very dedicated, hardworking, and competent team. And sir, I look forward to great things in the next administration. And they probably know by now that great things will be asked of them. But in saying that, just to quickly answer the first two questions, the answer is no and no. And the third question about what is done to help the fight of financial services. And I think Dr. Dax has ably talked about the active engagement. And this is definitely an area that fits very much into my own ethos about consulting and having a very much ensuring that we actually hear from but also engage with. So we're looking to increase that level of engagement with local stakeholders in the financial services industry, but also with the international stakeholders in Europe and the UK and the US and the like. So that is certainly going to be the main thrust of making sure that they do understand. I think you raised a very valid point that in many instances people don't understand what we do, and they don't understand the benefit of our financial services industry to the global economy, not just our local economy. So it's helping to be able to engage in a way that's meaningful, that they get it, that it makes sense to them in a way that is relevant to them. And so those are the challenges that I have put out to the industry already to help us at the ministry, provide us with these examples, provide us with the understanding of the structures and how we actually create value for the pension funds or create value for the NGOs that actually invest in the various developing countries and developing world to be able to provide the funds to have the various infrastructure investments or clean water, etc. So it's creating those messages that help us to convey to the world what we do and how it actually benefits and not necessarily detracts. So it's kind of changing the conversation, but we have to do that very much in tandem with industry. So I would invite him and anybody else that have any of these concrete examples, please provide us with some of those information so we can continue that dialogue in a way that is meaningful to those audiences that need to hear it.
And just to point out, Minister, that the questions 1 and 2 were plans to were there any plans to privatize the prison service, and the other one was whether or not there was any policy in relation to the growing of the population. From the last caller, you said no to both of those. So I just wanted to remind the listeners what the questions actually were. Ms. T, any observation before the minister leaves?
No, just there seems to be the continuing disconnect in terms of how the world views us as a financial service in terms of the services that we provide. And I know Tim Ridley wrote a paper precisely about what you're talking about centuries ago that deals with this issue. And so when we read a lot that was disclosed in the context of Irma about the BVI, the Cayman Islands, and so on, there seems to be this view that, that Britain is embarrassed about us. And not only that, when you're going to, if Britain is going to honor its contingent responsibility, if you're going to provide funding to help these communities get better and recover, that you have conditions which ensures that, literally you put an end to what we do here. Yeah. So based on what you're saying, it seems to be a continued misunderstanding between what we view about how we contribute to the success of the global economy and how Britain, and I mean, one of the guys that wrote this was the former Attorney General for Anguilla, and if he holds such a senior position and this is his view, I don't know where that disconnect and how it's going to, what steps are we going to take to ensure that, this discontinues.
So certainly one of the, and I think that's the biggest hurdle that we have, because the bombardment of the messaging from those quarters that want to shut us down, that want to create that misunderstanding really of how well regulated our jurisdiction is and how we do, as I said, add value to the global economy. One of the things that we've done, and certainly the Cayman Islands London office has been very instrumental in helping, is to create or resuscitate the APPG for Cayman Islands in particular. So we will be engaging with parliamentarians in the UK who have agreed to sit on that all parties parliamentary group to really learn more about, to help us understand or to help raise a level of understanding in their own jurisdiction or their own parliament. And you would have seen some of the benefits of that already starting to take fruit with some of the kinds of questions, the recognition that the Cayman Islands has gotten in the parliament recently about the efforts that we have taken in Anguilla, some of the, helping to educate the parliamentarians themselves about what it is that we do, so they feel better equipped. So when some of the pressures or some of the messages that are contrary to what we know to be the truth comes, they have a different frame of mind and frame of reference that they can draw on as well, to kind of help them to make an ultimate decision that isn't just one-sided or biased in that respect. So certainly it's this creating the material to help to tell our story better is something that we certainly need to be focusing on. And I think certainly from the ministry's perspective, that has been the absolute number one directive, but we know we can't do it in isolation of industry input, because it's the industry that actually, creates these actual structures and opportunities and actually does the work in that regard to make sure we have a vibrant financial services industry. And so therefore we've engaged very closely and continue to engage with Cayman Finance as one of the umbrella organizations, but I've also already had meetings and started to cast the net wider to meet with the industry associations, so the IMAX, the Sept, the Bankers Association, to kind of, get the understanding of this engagement, as I said, increased engagement at the local level to help facilitate the increased engagement and the messages and the information needed to be successful at the international level as well.
Minister, any closing comments?
Certainly, I just want to say thank you, OC, for once again, as always, facilitating a very lively discussion. I want to thank your co-panelists. It's the first time I've had an opportunity to engage with both of you in this regard, but I think you certainly have added value to the dynamics of the comments and questions. So thank you for that. And again, just want to publicly thank, as I said, the staff at the ministry level who have just run with the various things that we've started since taking office back in May of 2017. And I also, in particular, since we're talking about the prisons and Department of Community Rehabilitation, just want to thank the directors of both of those, Ms. Theresa Echenike and the director Neil Lavis, for the job that they're doing, and their respective staffs in the organization. But again, because we focus on those doesn't mean the other ones aren't equally important. It's just we're trying to be efficient with the time, and we know we can only do so much in the hour and a half that we've had. So, but it has been good, I think, to get the message out, to begin the message. And OC, we have a history now, and you know that I certainly will make an effort to be here as regular as possible, but it's always a balancing act, because at the same time you have to get the work done, and I have to rush off to a conference call right now.
Precisely.
To be able to
we know that hazard
what we need to do.
management definitely falls under you.
Absolutely.
And we hope and we trust that during this hurricane season that we won't have any reason to have you on here on an emergency basis with that. So we will keep our fingers crossed. We will continue with our prayers to spare us, as well as our neighboring countries as well. I want to thank you very much for being here, Minister, and for your support staff as well. I want to thank my two co-hosts with me this morning. I want to thank our listening and viewing audience for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be in office cubicle or if you're in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who is less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling Dwayne Banks at 12 noon for Talk today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.